communication, an act which differentiates us from animals. An essential key to evolving into what we are today, an intellectual species called Homo sapiens. Humans have been communicating since the dawn of time, since the beginning of its own species. The ability to communicate both verbally and visually makes our communication better than any other animals on the planet. For the past thousands of years, communication has been changing constantly, but most of the forms involved the use of language. But how did we communicate before language came into existence? And how did our ancestors communicate before they were evolved enough to use language? In today's video, we'll be talking about every form of communication that humans have ever had. But to begin with, we have to go quite far back in time. And by far, I mean really, really far. Among the rise of hundreds of species crawling its way to the top of the food chain, one particular species stood out. The species which would later evolve into the ruler of the world, spreading its kite and occupy most land on the planet, human. The most ancient representation of modern humans, Homo habilis, appeared in the scene. Homo habilis existed from around 2.4 million to 1.6 million years ago. They are widely known as handyman since they were intelligent enough to craft simple stone tools, such as a knife for cutting and hunting. Although the handymen were much smarter than other primates during their time, they still couldn't communicate through the use of language, simply because they were both physically and intellectually not capable of doing so. All they could do was make simple sounds, such as grunting and shouting, and using their hands to make basic gestures to communicate with others in sight. But without the use of vocal communication, our ancestors would never be able to evolve and thrive in the world overflown with predators. So they evolved into creatures with the ability to produce more complex sounds, similar to languages but not as complex. They evolved into the great-grandfather of our species, called Homo erectus. Homo erectus, translated as upright man, were the first human species to walk on both of their feet in more open areas, just like what we do today. They lived for as long as 1.4 million years, from around 1.6 million to 200,000 years ago, which is the longest surviving time of all human species. This gains them more time to evolve and acquire knowledge of the surrounding environment. Throughout the time, the species began to communicate more with their voices than their bare hands. Although some believe that the concept of language was beyond their comprehension, there is quite a handful of evidence that supports the existence of a more advanced form of communication than making gestures and shouting. Homo erectus were intelligent enough to create arts, symbols, and were able to craft boats. They had social structures and planned out settlements which they could never accomplish without some sort of language. With all this evidence, it is strongly believed that during the time of Homo erectus, the first and the most simple language was created. Like the forms of communication that shifted throughout the years, the evolution of a species never stopped, and species would never stay the same for too long. Eventually, Homo erectus, the upright man, evolved into the early Homo sapiens, the true beginning of modern humans. Homo sapiens is a Latin word that we use to call our own species, which can be translated as wise men. They originated in Africa, which was home to the majority of humans for as long as 100,000 years. During this period of time, the species began to evolve to the point where they look pretty much like us today, and they were able to communicate by speaking archaic languages. Although the languages were created, the ability to fluently speak was still yet to be developed. With the usage of language and vocal communication, it was enough for early humans to create a more advanced society. The ability to adapt to the surroundings was essential to survive, but with the tools and new technology they had, it was not a huge problem for them. As time passed by, Africa, the place they called home, was getting quite hard to inhabit due to the dramatic changes in climate. Food was getting harder to find, and the climate shifted from wet to dry. Not soon after it was unbearable, the Great Migration began. By the time they began to migrate around the world, the species evolved into modern Homo sapiens, which is our current species. They fully developed the ability to speak while having complex oral cultures, and creating new languages to be used in different regions. In a matter of 100,000 years, almost the whole world was populated with its own cultures, languages, and lots of new ways of communication were formed. With the spread of mankind around the globe comes distinguishable cultures and traditions, with each civilization writing its own history at the beginning of the book of our own species, modern Homo sapiens.